Hello. You're probably wondering who I am. I am actually the Honorable Judge Peterson, and I am the uncle of your teacher, Mr. Peterson. Okay. And the reason I'm here today is that I understand you guys just covered the Mystery of the Broken Gong assignment. And every year in the past, I have come in order to be the judge and preside over the case to see whether or not Jordan is innocent. Okay, because more people blame Jordan than Lanaya. He was then taken to trial, and that's what we would do. Sadly, because of the pandemic, we're not able to do the trial this year. But I thought I would still at least make a visit and read you the verdict from what I've seen so far from your guys' answers. Okay. Now, Mr. Peterson showed me your assignments, and only 20 of them have been turned in so far. So this obviously isn't representative of everybody, but we did have a pretty clear verdict, in my opinion. Normally, it would have to be unanimous if it were a trial, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to take which one had the most votes. So two individuals out of those 18 didn't give an answer as to who they thought it was. But of the 20, so then there's 18 left who did actually say who they thought it was. Of that group, 4 thought it was Jordan, and 14 thought it was Lanaya. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to call that a verdict in favor of Jordan, that he is found not guilty. All right, my trusty gavel. Now I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Peterson very soon, but I'll just very briefly say I agree with the verdict that you guys reached. In my opinion, I think there's enough evidence showing that Jordan's not guilty, and probably enough evidence to support a verdict that would say that Lanaya is guilty. And I'll just say real quick, the biggest thing to me about this assignment, and I need to go to the share screen. It's not working. Hold on, please. Let's try it again. There we go. This should work now. Is that if you look at Jordan and Lanaya's statements, they're different stories, right? Jordan claims that he got shoved into a desk. Okay, so you're picturing somebody hitting a desk, sprawling onto the ground, right? Lanaya is saying that Jordan flicked her in the ear, and then that when she came and threatened Jordan, he decided to come back at her, and he pushes off the desk, which knocked the gong off, right? That's pushing off someone's desk versus smacking into a desk and falling to the ground are two very different things. And so I think somebody who's really thinking, like a detective here, or even like a historian, is going to say, are either of those stories corroborated, right? Corroborated means does somebody else, another trusted source, right, agree with that or present a similar picture? Now, Lanaya's story isn't corroborated by anybody else. And in fact, her friend doesn't even, her friend Jamie doesn't even tell the same story. But Jordan's story is corroborated. And guess who his story is corroborated by? By Anthony, who is a bystander, which is the most trusted source we have out there, right? Anthony says he sees somebody smack into the desk, which does not sound like somebody pushing off the desk. It sounds like somebody hitting it. He sees Jordan on the ground, which wouldn't happen if Jordan pushed off the desk. And Lanaya is nearby laughing, which would suggest that she did something to him as opposed to him just coming at her, right? Why would she laugh if she didn't just do that to him? So I think that that's pretty clear evidence Jordan didn't do anything, enough that we can't prove him guilty. And like I said, I think it seems clear to me that most likely we could prove that Lanaya is guilty and that she was responsible for the gong breaking because she pushed Jordan into the desk, which led to it being broken. Okay, I'm sure Mr. Peterson's probably going to add a little bit more detail to that, but I just wanted to go ahead and come on, see you guys, say hi, and preside over that sort of mini trial there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take off then. You guys have a great year and be good. Hey, guys. So I see you guys got to meet my uncle Bruce, or as he calls himself, the Honorable Judge Peterson. Anyway, let's talk a bit more about this stuff. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking at my notes here, what I want to cover. So I will come back to some of the source analysis in just a second. I'm just going to make one announcement, and that is, again, and I've said this once or twice, you've got to use your own words on the assignments you do. Okay, so I'm just going to stress that again. I've had a couple students who looked things up on Google for an assignment and then put it in word for word. Right? That's one of the things we talked about in the worst case scenario assignment, is that would be considered plagiarism, right? You have to use your own words. And if you're getting information from somebody else, even when you put it in your own words, you need to say where you got it from. So just wanted to stress that again. Got to do that. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at those ACDC skills again. And just remember, again, the reason we're looking at ACDC is that these are skills that we're just going to use throughout the year at various times, okay? Because evaluating sources is a really important part of doing history and doing history well, right? So also is a valuable part of like your regular lives about knowing what to trust, as I tried to suggest in the last lesson. But that's why we're covering it, if you're wondering. So remember, author, context, and corroboration are the three big ones, because the D is really more of your last step after you've checked the source out. Determine usefulness is then deciding like, okay, am I going to use this source or not? But in terms of like building your sense of whether to trust a source, it's author, context, and corroboration. And I'm going to just show you how I used it. And I think, not that one. And I think, a lot of you have or will use these hopefully when you did this assignment. Okay, so this Broken Gong assignment, even though I didn't have you describe author, context, corroboration as part of the assignment, really you were supposed to be using these skills. Okay, you're using the author skill because you're looking at each of those individuals and thinking about, is this person trustworthy, right? And one way to think about whether someone's trustworthy is, are they an expert on this? Do they know what they're talking about? Another way to think about it is whether or not they are biased, okay? And whether you're biased means you have a connection to the situation that might give you a reason why you'd want to lie, okay? If somebody's unbiased, it means they don't have a connection. It's harder to see why would they lie about this anyway, right? And so that was one of the things we talked about when I went over what are all the reasons we might mistrust some of these sources in the lesson. And I guess I will say real quick that there were some students who I think struggled to remember to apply that every time you looked at Jordan, Lanaya, Alexis, the why trust them or why not, I'm looking to see, did you use those skills that were covered in the lesson, right? So were you thinking about whether Jordan is a trustworthy source, and were you using all those ideas that I went over in the lesson to apply that? Okay, so I just want to kind of make that sort of clear there, is that that's what I was looking for you to do, is to use those skills we talked about. Anyway, so I'm going to say that for each person, for a lot of them at least, there were sort of like reasons to trust or not trust based on who they were as the author. I'll use one example, that Sheila was Jordan's mom, I believe. Hope I got that right. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's the same idea, is that whether it's Jordan's mom or whether it's Lanaya's mom, that's not going to be the best source to figure out whether they did it or not, because they're biased, right? That person, and again, doesn't mean that they couldn't still tell the truth, because I think a lot of people do still tell the truth, but it just means that that's not the best source to go to, because they might potentially either lie about it because maybe they don't want to pay for the gong, or maybe they don't know either way, but they might be inclined to believe that, oh, my kid would never do that, right? Because of their bias, okay? So that's, one of the approaches of thinking about an author and whether that author is a good source or not is, do they have any bias? Like, were they connected to the situation? And then, like I said, you could also think about, are they even an expert, in this, whatever you're trying to figure out, right? Do they have the knowledge and the expertise to give you a good opinion on the situation? Okay. Context means like what was going on at that time that might impact whether a source is trustworthy or not. Okay, again, certain people in this broken gong assignment, you could use context to potentially rule them out as a really good source. And so I meant to put Alexis up here. With Alexis, I think she was, ruled out because of the context of the situation. She blamed Jordan, but a couple aspects I think make her a weak source. One thing is she was mad at Jordan at that time, which gives her a possible reason to want to lie and just make it seem like it was Jordan, because maybe she wanted to get in trouble as a way to get back at him, right? That's part of the context. That's something that was going on at that time that might influence whether she's a trustworthy source. The other part of the context is just she wasn't even there, right? So if you think of the context of the situation and you realize, oh, Alexis was not even at the event, I think that rules her out as a strong source to use for the assignment. To try to find the answer. The last thing I wanted to touch on is corroboration, right? To corroborate a source is to say, can I find another source who's trustworthy that supports or shows a similar story or similar view as the one that I'm looking at? And I think I heard my uncle was talking a bit about this, so I shouldn't have to probably push the point too much. But Lanaya didn't have anybody corroborating her story. And even her friend who was trying to show that she was innocent had a different story than she did, which is a bad sign. For Jordan, his story was corroborated, and it was corroborated by the best source out there, right? A bystander. Because again, if we're going back to this sort of idea of author, of looking at which authors are the most trustworthy, Anthony's the most trustworthy of those possible sources because one, he was there, and two, he didn't have a connection to the situation. He didn't have an obvious reason to lie about it. So the fact that both of those stories line up and the fact that both of those stories make Lanaya guilty is the reason why I think viewing Lanaya as guilty is the best argument that can be made. Okay, so let's move along then. The last thing I just want to do then is set you up for today's assignment. Today's assignment is we're going to do one more thing with ACDC, and then we're going to move on to our Constitution crash course unit. But it's important to be able to take these skills and use them also with historical sources, okay? And there are two types of historical sources that I know you're familiar with from your last couple years in history, but we're going to keep kind of reviewing it and working on it. And that would be a primary source and a secondary source. And the explanation is as simple as this. A primary source would be something that was written or a picture was taken at the time that an event was occurring, right? Because that means they were primary, right? They were there. They saw the event. They know what happened, and they are now trying to communicate what they saw. A secondary source is somebody who later goes back and from a different time period and writes about what happened in the past and tries to pass that information along to you. So they're called secondary because it's like you're getting secondhand information from them. They weren't there, but they're still trying to figure the situation out and give you the best information they have. So a very quick example to explain the difference would be like if you're studying George Washington, if you read one of George Washington's speeches, or even like a speech by, somebody in his cabinet or his vice president, those are all primary sources because those are people who were there and involved with those events, and they are expressing what they saw, okay? If you read a textbook that talked about George Washington as a president, that was, let's say, published 3 years ago, that's a secondary source because that person went and read a bunch of primary sources and then is now trying to summarize that info for you and help you to understand what you need to know about George Washington based on their study, okay? But it is still secondhand. That is still information that you got from them and that they then had to learn from their primary sources, okay? And that applies even if it was an old textbook, let's say the textbook was written in 1950, it's still not a primary source because George Washington didn't live in 1950, right? He was around in the late 1700s. So that's still a secondary source because it's only a primary source if the person created it and was around at that time and witnessed those events, okay? So the thing you're going to do today is you're going to use ACDC analysis to determine whether or not this painting would be a good painting to use, or a good source to use to show information about what the first Thanksgiving was like. Okay. And there's a little bit more to it. So as always, read the directions. Please, please read the directions. It's going to make it easier for you in the long run. So there's a little more to that. But you're going to look, I gave you a little information. I said what the title of the painting was. I told you who the author was, gave just a very brief description of him, when it was painted, so on and so forth. And so then you have enough information to then go through and think about the author, whether he himself is trustworthy, whether the context of when the source was created makes it trustworthy. And I gave you another piece of information from a different source and asked you whether that information corroborates the way that Ferris, the guy who painted this, whether or not it corroborates the way he viewed the first Thanksgiving. So I guess the last thing I would just say before you guys get started is that if you look at this painting, the first thing you have to kind of think about is, well, what is Ferris trying to show you about the first Thanksgiving? And so again, just for me, the two things that stand out to me are, one, he's showing this as being like a really peaceful, harmonious, happy event between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans in that area. The Wampanoags is what they were called, their tribe. But then the second thing I noticed is that, with these paintings, you have to look closely at the details, right? Is that it also shows the Pilgrims really as helping the Native Americans out, right? Is that it looks like the Native Americans came and it's like the Pilgrims are saying, hey, we've got all this food. We're going to give you the food, and we're kind of helping you out here. Okay, so that's the vision that I see from that particular painting. In your assignment, you're going to look at whether that is a good source to use to show what really did happen and what it was really like, and go through all those different steps. As always, that is in your Google Classroom, that assignment sheet. I believe I titled it ACDC Analysis, First Thanksgiving. And yeah, it's all there. Contact me if you have any questions. Good luck with everything. I'll be seeing you soon.